Hello and welcome to another Abley FME Fireside. In the previous episode we talked about our experiences with how we first got into using FME. A common theme of that was Todd introducing us to it, so today we're talking to Todd about how he first got started with FME.
Yeah, well, it's a while ago now, so actually since we're in 2022 it's over 15 years ago. So in 2007 I think is when I first got my hands on it. I'd heard about it for a few years prior to that. Oh, look at that. Yes, beautiful. That's a great picture. That's from 2007 as well. So started out, basically, it all happened because the guy who used FME in our business was leaving the organisation. And I just got earmarked as, basically because I sat next to him, the transition spot for his work in that space. So we were consuming basically all the cadastral information from New Zealand and the titles and survey information, and getting that as raw tables and converting that into a bunch of different outputs for a range of different clients. And that was a pretty long running process. It took a couple of days for it to process into the database, and then another 3 or 4 days to process all the information out to the different clients. So we had about 20 different clients and they all received something different. Mike Taylor was the person who introduced me to this, and he had been using FME for years, and since early 2000s, and he had built all these processes that did it.
And this was before FME Workbench, wasn't it?
FME Workbench existed, but its capabilities weren't like it is today. So basically I was writing, adding things in FME functions and factories to FME scripts. So the base of it was FME scripts. Yeah, so here's a good example. So this is a beautiful process which was importing the data. In fact, that top bit, that TCL there, doing abbreviations to road names, or the ends of roads.
Oh, right, yeah, you can see.
Yeah, road to RD and etc. But then as you get down inside of it, there's a whole bunch of beautiful readers and writers and functions and factories, and
you start seeing things that you might see in the log file, like multi-reader.
Yes.
You see
yes.
some of that nowadays.
I mean,
multi-writer.
The FMW behind, if you open it up in a text file, is basically this, but with a few things around the GUI, and also it's more compacted. It's not as easy to read as the scripts we wrote, but it was a really good learning of how FME worked, taking over that responsibility. And Mike was very nice and left me a good amount of cash in the project that I could actually spend basically a month going through, learning the processes, learning what FME did, and and especially at the time I was used to writing programs VB6. It's great at VB6, so it was FME was kind of a really different structure, not because of the way it was written out, but from the idea that it runs down the page, that there is no modules that you
you don't sort of link them together like you do with a join connector.
Correct. So the order in which your process runs is the order in which it goes down the page, except for a couple of things at the top and the headers and stuff.
So and here you've got.
That's the schema setting for it.
Right.
And of course, this is back then as well. There's no dynamic.
Yeah.
So there's everything was written out per layer, etc. But if you get down into the function factories, which will be a wee way down, this was a rather large. How many lines is this? Yes.
T factory, reference factory. You see
just over 2,000.
Yeah, you see all those sort of things referenced. You know, I'll see a T factory and a reference factory in my log files.
Yep. I assume, well, I'm going to assume, I haven't actually looked, whether a junction's probably just a T factory.
Yes,
so just the idea of splitting things.
There you go, there's a T factory.
Yep.
So this is in a current FMW. So yeah, we've got the T factory there, and it was factory def, and
so
some parts of the
knowing that
are almost identical.
Knowing the functions and factories as well has actually helped me out a lot when we've moved over to desktop. And I think for me, I wrote those scripts. So, the bulk of my work in FME for the next year was doing that process. So there was lots and lots of scripts that I was writing, updating, etc. And then on the side...
And you say you were writing them.
Yes.
As is shown, whereas nowadays we don't write an FME workbench, we author or build it.
Yeah, we can still write it. The other thing though was that I was using Workbench out on the side for kind of smaller processes. Like I say, it had a lot of functionality, but it didn't necessarily have all the functionality that you could do with functions and factories. It was still getting developed into a product. Sorry, that sounds a bit like it wasn't quite there, but it's not quite there compared to what we have today, which is just amazing compared to the Workbench we had back then. And
even on that, I think back to 2017, which was the first version I used, and how far it's come. Probably the biggest thing for me over that time was feature cache education.
Yes.
Going from having to have a recorder and a player, and put that strategically.
Inspectors everywhere.
And inspectors everywhere. You can
see. I go back to, I can't remember if it was 2011 or 2013. I can't remember which one. But when Dynamic came in, and that was like, took a while to get your head around. But man, once you learned it, it was like, anything's up for grabs now.
Yeah.
And I think, probably lots of people still out there don't know how to write all the different ranges of dynamic things. But once you actually understand how it works, the stuff you can do.
And it's probably a lot easier now to reference and use in that user interface than it was back then in a scripting language as it sort of developed further.
Yes. And I probably did my full transition to Workbench in about 2009. It was when the Esri File Geodatabase got released. Was another big into FME. Was another big step. But at that point, I kind of found my transition in that I thought the transformers inside the workspace or Workbench were at a level now that they just saved me a whole bunch of time. And actually, List became so much more understandable in the Workbench than they did in
scripting
language. But it was
for some reason that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And but even the landscape back then, you said to people, I could do that in FME, and they were like, what? What's FME? And
to be honest, I still get that sometimes.
Yes, but at least in the spatial area, like even then, it was kind of still very niche. And now, like people come and go. More or less now come anyway. Come and go. Oh, can FME do this? Both fortunately and unfortunately, sometimes the answer is yes.
Yeah.
The other things that I remember quite well back then is probably more use of Python. And when I say that, it was because FME's grown a lot of functions and its readers and writers and all that sort of stuff. But back then, some of the stuff still sat outside of FME. And one of the ones that I always kind of remember back to following the earthquakes was some of the tags on the photos coming out of cameras and stuff that we were processing.
Oh, the EXIF data.
The EXIF data. And so the reader of and those times wasn't able to read that information, so utilising Python scripting.
I actually seem to recall that still may have been the case early in 2017.
Oh no,
because there's an EXIF reader custom transformer.
Yes, there is. It might read more, but the JPEG stuff had most of it.
Right.
The structure is a little weird. But one of the things around that I remember is from that time is like Oliver's Python Corner, which was quite a big part of the community back then. The FMEpedia, and going off there and going, how do I do this? And still writing something in Python through it via Python caller. So as we can see here, when's that from?
First published on August the 4th, 2011 by Mark Ireland.
So that must have a reference to, look at that beautiful page. But the Oliver's Python Corner at the time was both interesting and confusing sometimes. But FME's come a long way in that Python space as well.
There we go.
And actually, even like as I say that now, I noticed that in the 2022 version, there is now more Python documentation around FME General, which is another library which I found previously, but is now actually documented.
Yeah.
Which has got some really cool stuff in it. We won't go into that.
We won't go into that today. Maybe in the future.
No, and but the one thing that I have noticed around FME is, and the guys at SAFE always talk about it, is that continual progression. I think it's probably easier now for someone to pick it up. It still takes a bit of time to get their understanding of what FME is and how it works.
Yes. Yeah. I think we've touched on that in previous ones where a lot of people come from like a model builder aspect where you work at the entire data set level, whereas FME is at that feature by feature level.
But once people get their head around it, there's so many tools and things in place now, like your feature caching and all those things that just make it easier for people to learn. Yeah. And so
if you had one or two tips for someone who has never used FME before or might be in the very early stages, is from someone with your level of experience and seeing how it's developed.
I would say that don't expect to know it all in a couple of years. Like I think of all the things that I learn and continue to learn. As we were discussing one of the things yesterday that we learnt. But also to try and surround yourself with people that are doing FME. It's a lot easier to gain knowledge from a range of people rather than utilising it just yourself. So if you don't work with other people that use FME, just go and read the forums and find out
Jump
all that
on
sort
the forums.
of stuff.
There's lots and lots of activity on the forums.
Lots of questions, lots of ideas.
And different approaches.
Functions and factories are great to understand if you really want to get into the detail of what everything does. But there's and play around with scenarios like.
And there's no wrong way to achieve something. There are better ways and worse ways.
Yes.
But ultimately, as long as you get a result, you've got that result, you can then begin to refine it.
Yeah. And I think it is a case of don't think you're an expert after you've done a few things in it. It's just a case of continual learning and just growing skill, growing knowledge how things work, understanding all the bits and pieces that go into it, and you kind of progress from there.
And I guess have fun.
If
you're not having fun doing it, then
that's the great thing about working with a bunch of people that use it as well. Is that you get to share those things.
You get to share the cool things you find.
Cool things you find, that little intricacies that change the way it works, and
because we're working on quite different things and kind of learning in different directions and kind of sharing back into the group. And
And the three of us, and Gavin included, so the four of us, we've all come into FME from very different directions, and we've brought in our own specialties, which we can then apply in different scenarios. And something I've always said, you give the four of us the same problem,
and I'll do it right, and you'll do it right.
and the expected outcome, we'll all probably do it a different way.
Probably, maybe.
It depends on the scale of the problem. If it's
a
as simple as adding a field to a geodatabase, I think there's only really a very small handful of ways you can do that. But if it's a wider problem, there's so many approaches you can make.
I think one of the things that I also like about working as a team is that we set the standards. So, we work together to create a standard that we want to adhere to. And so when I pick up other people's workspaces and stuff, I kind of know the processes and thoughts that will go behind all the things that go around the project, such as error checking and things that we do and don't do when we build these workspaces. So that's nice as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Todd, for sharing some insight into where you started with the FME
and how old I am.
And how old you are. And I must say, and because you can probably agree with me, very glad we don't have to write FME by hand.
Yeah, I would not.
That looks like a nightmare.
It was fine unless you just missed that backslash on the end of the line, and then everything just fell to bits.
Well, thanks, Todd, again. So that was we're the DE team here at Abley. This is another FME Fireside. Thanks, Todd, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.